So hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Pete Timmerman. I'm the director of the Webster University Film Series. I'll do a brief intro before I hand over the microphone, such as it is, to our speaker tonight, Cait Lore. If you're not familiar with the Webster University Film Series, we're St. Louis's only year-round nonprofit cinema. We usually show movies on Webster University's main campus in Webster Groves in the Winifred Moore Auditorium. But yeah, usually like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, sometimes a couple of times during the week, we show first run and repertory films like art house, international, whatever. But yeah, we haven't been able to play anything in person since last March. We're one of just a small number of movie theaters in St. Louis that hasn't reopened since the pandemic hit. We will reopen at some point, just a matter of when. I'm reluctant to take guesses at this point because I've guessed 100 times in the past year and have been wrong every time. But anyway, in the meantime, what we've been doing to occupy ourselves is we've been hosting first run movies for the most part, sometimes new restorations of older movies in a quote unquote virtual theater, to where the setup is not entirely unlike coming to the theater and seeing a movie with us. It's the stuff that we would have booked in person if circumstances were better, but you just have to watch it online alone, like sad and alone in your bedroom on your computer. Nobody wants that, but it's maybe the best option under the current circumstances. But right now, as we speak, there's a French film about to leave called I Just Don't Think I'll Scream. Today's the last day for it. But if you rent it today, you get the full, there's a 72-hour period of rental. So like if you rent it after this meeting is over, you'll have through the weekend to watch it. It's a compilation film. In 2016, the director of the film suffered a bad breakup and he hunkered down and watched movie after movie after movie after movie. And then he made a film about it to where he kind of rapid fires through clips of the movies he watched as a way of expressing his state of mind during the bad breakup. Yeah, it's pretty well suited to pandemic circumstances and lockdown and quarantine, as you can imagine. Then also there's a Kenyan documentary called Softy in our virtual theater now that's playing for another week. It's about a first photographer and later politician whose nickname is Softy. His real name is Boniface Mwangi. I'm probably butchering that name. Anyway, but he runs for a political office, and he's very charming, and his wife is very charming. His campaign manager is very charming. It starts off rough. There's a lot of blood in the first like 15 minutes, but it settles in and is a very pleasing documentary. And then opening tomorrow, we've got a Ukrainian science fiction film that's new called Atlantis. It's told mostly like in static tableau. It takes some kind of aesthetic cues from Children of Men. It's interesting. It was Ukraine's submission to the Academy for the Best International Picture or Best International Film Oscar this year, except it didn't make the shortlist. The shortlist is terrible, but that's a rant for another time. But yeah, so that opens tomorrow. You can get to these films. Our website is webster.edu/film series. So that's where all the links are to rent them. You usually pay like $10 or $12 to rent the movie, and then we get half of that. So, like if you pay $12, we'll get $6 and the distributor gets $6. They're basically just gifting us money, which we appreciate. It helps keep the lights on, or keep the lights off, I guess, as the case may be, while the pandemic is on. And then also we've been doing these virtual speakers events. So tonight is the second night of Fassbinder February. I'll get back to Fassbinder February in a second. But before I forget to mention it, I wanted to say that this coming Monday, we're doing another virtual speaking event that's not part of Fassbinder February. Starting last September, we've been doing a lot of virtual speaking events with the Confucius Institute, who I collaborate with as often as I can. They bring in very interesting speakers and we talk about popular films. But Monday specifically, we've got Dr. Belinda Huh from UC Berkeley. She's a postdoctoral fellow at UC Berkeley, and she's going to talk about Zhang Yimou's film Hero. That's free to attend. It's that one starts at 6 p.m., not 7. So 6 at yeah. But you can register for that webster.edu/film series. It's also probably a good idea to follow us on social media if you don't already, on Twitter and Instagram. It's at WU Film Series, and on Facebook, it's at Webster Film Series. But I said this last week, I'll say it again. Facebook seems to hate us now for some reason. I think I did something to aggravate its algorithm. So maybe don't follow us there because you'll probably never see anything that we post. Yeah, I guess all of that said, back to Fassbinder February. So tonight we've got Cait Lore speaking about Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, which I've been looking forward to. Next week, if you come back, I'm the speaker, which will be weird. I'm not going to be introducing myself at least. But I'm speaking about In a Year with 13 Moons, which I just adore. I think it's maybe his best film. I kind of go back and forth on that. But that said, I'm not sure that it's the best starting point. I guess if you're here now, you've hopefully seen Petra at least. But yeah, I don't know that if you haven't ever seen any Fassbinder film, In a Year with 13 Moons is the best place to start. But yeah, that's next week. And then 2 weeks from today, we're hosting Robert Hunt speaking about the third generation. Robert Hunt taught me a class specifically on Fassbinder. I took a topics class on the films of Rainer Werner Fassbinder when I was an undergrad, but he was the teacher of that class. So I'm excited to invite him back. Yeah, I guess that's right. And then next month, the director under focus is going to be Sofia Coppola. We're kind of on the brink of announcing those. In some of our communications, we've said dates and times of the films and speakers, but we're about to unleash the formal copy and descriptions of events on the world. So if you follow us, there's like an email list we can add you to and things like that. Get a hold of us at any time. We'll add you to it. I will quit rambling now, aside from to introduce Cait Lore. Cait is a film critic for The Lens. The Lens is the film criticism arm of Cinema St. Louis. Cinema St. Louis is the local nonprofit that puts on the St. Louis International Film Festival, among many other things. If you were here last week, you saw Joshua Ray speak. Josh is also a film critic for The Lens. There's a reason why I keep on booking film critics from The Lens for these speaking events. It's because I like them. They do good work at The Lens. There are 2 more writers at The Lens that I'll probably book for these things in the future. But yeah, I'm particularly fond of Cait's writing. She is maybe less prolific than the other Lens writers, but I'm always happy to see her name pop up on reviews. And she's especially good with Fassbinder. I don't mean to talk out of turn, but she has a master's degree and her dissertation was on Fassbinder, and I read it and I liked it a lot. So I've really been looking forward to Cait speaking tonight. And Petra is one of his best films. I don't know, I've been very excited. So with that in mind, I'll finally shut up and kill my screen and kill my microphone and let Cait talk. Oh wait, no, I take it back. One more thing. We'll do Q&A at the end, and you can ask questions at any time. At the bottom of your screen, you should have a Q&A box, and you can type in your question. But yeah, feel free to add those in at any point during the presentation, because it's nice to kind of jump right in when Cait's presentation is over. If you don't want to type them in and would rather actually audibly speak, you can raise your hand, and then our behind the scenes person will enable your microphone so you can speak your question instead. But yeah, feel free to do that anytime. And at the end of this session, we'll open it up for a Q&A. And now, finally, sorry, Cait, that I took so long. Please take over before I start talking again.
Okay, hi guys. So this for me is the most nerve-wracking part. It's when I mess with technology. So I'm gonna try and bring up a slideshow for you, and I'm gonna be referencing notes. I'm hoping it doesn't overlay onto the sides, the screen. So let's see what's happening here. Hang on. All right. Okay, cool. So before we start, I'm going to try and pull up my notes, like I said here. So one more moment. Oh, no. All right. Okay. I'm thinking you can't see the window. If you can, I'm so sorry that I've just eclipsed my own slideshow, but I'm thinking we're good to go. Okay. So I thought that I would zoom out a bit before we jump into Fassbinder. Oh, wait. Is it working? I just got a little chat, so I want to make sure I'm not. Okay. Sorry for this awkward start. Okay, I've got the technology figured out. I'm ready to go. Okay, so I thought I would zoom out and just talk about the new German cinema in the 60s, because usually when we talk about new German cinema, we jump to the 70s and we don't really talk about what was happening previous to that. And I think this is a good foundation for Fassbinder. So 1962 is when the new German cinema officially starts. It's a term that's usually applied for films made in West Germany from the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s. The movement officially kicks off in 62 when a group of young German filmmakers signed the Oberhausen Manifesto declaring old film is dead, we believe in a new one. And dead it was. In 1960, West German theaters were closing at the rate of 1 a day. Since 1956, tickets had dropped by 80 million in each of the next 4 years. Much of this had to do with the effect of World War II on German filmmakers and artists. There were other factors too, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna bypass all that. So you can ask about it if you want though. So another thing, what's important here is the huge generation gap that's going to be between the young 60s filmmakers and this youth wave and their parents. You know, they were usually, these filmmakers were born during World War II, and the parents were the people who often supported or grew up around a Nazi Germany. Yeah, so the manifesto itself did not really address politics like directly in the same way like I don't know, Brazil's manifesto would. But what they wanted was a fresh start and a fresh direction. That's what they were really pushing in this manifesto. There was no established film culture at the time, like say there was in France, you know, because like in the French New Wave, when Truffaut wrote that famous piece, he was critiquing like French art films, but German art films, like there was nothing to stand on. It was just all, you know, rubble. So yeah, this is what makes the new German cinema very interesting though, because they are carving a language for themselves, like explicitly, like they know they're doing that. Yeah, and another important note is that the rise of the new German cinema corresponds with a rise in film studies. So if you see here this happy little man on the left, it's hard to believe that he can be this happy and a philosopher and a filmmaker and a poet, but he was. It's Alexander Kluge. So he's a really important director for this movement, but even more important than his directorial efforts are going to be his like intellectual contributions and his support of the big people we think of, like Herzog and Fassbinder and Wim Wenders. Yeah, so he pretty much penned the majority of the manifesto. And another part of the manifesto as well, I skipped over this, sorry, is so, and a lot of the international press, like the Cahiers du Cinema, they were talking a lot about reality versus truth and the nature of cinema. So these young filmmakers were soaking all that in, and a lot of them, like Kluge, were working on sets in France, occasionally assisting with the French New Wave directors. So there is a little bit of a borrowed culture there, but it's a very different movement. All right, so if you can't kind of like lump all these guys together, because again, the focus is new language, so everyone's kind of trying out their own thing, but there is going to be, because it is so specifically located in a time in German history, there's going to be some thematic connections here, most of which involve, you know, challenging spectators in order to confront the residual fascism in contemporary Germany. That's the big one. And there's usually also a self-reflexivity to it, or like a kind of it's Brechtian, right? It's aware of what it is. It doesn't trust the film form. Like these are people that grew up in like a propaganda state, and like they are not so naive that like they think that films contain like objective truth, you know. So anyway, through the mid 60s, the movement kind of skipped ahead there. Through the mid 60s, the movement struggled to find its voice. Many of these films were caught under the shadow of the French New Wave and the Italian Neorealists. Others were critical missteps, which is kind of just a nice way of saying that they failed. But you know, if you're trying to do something new, you're gonna fail a lot. Yeah, but by 1971, German film would be soaking up much of the ink across the academic journals and the critical press. Films by Werner Herzog, Wim Wenders, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, they were all screening at the New York Film Festival that year. And in that moment, in 71, they were no longer the young German filmmakers, which is usually what they were called up until then. They were the new German cinema. All right, so moving on. Rainer Werner Fassbinder. So we're going to jump right to when Fassbinder was 17. I'm going to skip a lot of the formative stuff. It's all very important, but we don't have time. So he was 17 years old when the manifesto hit. And by then he already knew he was going to be a filmmaker. He was obsessed. Yeah, but in 65, so jumping again already, Fassbinder's 20 years old, he's 1 year out of school, and he's got no diploma to show for it, but who cares? He's an artist. Now he just needs his benefactors, collaborators, that's what he needs. So this leads him to room with a friend of his who's an actor, Christopher Roser. Christopher Roser has a substantial amount of money, but Fassbinder doesn't know this yet. So to make rent, Fassbinder is starting to pick up odd jobs, writing poems and short stories whenever he has downtime. He enrolls in acting school, he goes to bohemian bars, and he tries to work up the nerve to work with the artists and activists there, but he's really shy and he doesn't have much to show for himself, so he kind of sticks to himself. But then three big things happen, okay? So he finds out, one, that Roser has the money that he needs to finance a feature. 2, he wins first place in a writing contest, which leads him to 3, meet Irem Herman, probably one of the most important people in Fassbinder's life. So he met her at one of those Munich bars I was referencing earlier, because once he won first place, he kind of worked up the courage to ask to put on an event at one of those bars, and he had Roser read his piece. The prize-winning piece was called A Slice of Bread. And Roser, performer, Fassbinder gave him some time to like kind of sneak into the corner, you know, make himself small in the dark of the bar. He was disappearing into that like signature leather jacket of his, but still Herman would find him. She would see him and she would know in that moment that she was in love with him, or at least that's what she says. Um, so yeah, they met, they talked, they had mutual friends from that acting class. She was not in it. She was, I think, working at a car dealership. She wasn't so ambitious, but she was just obsessed with him and spent a whole summer thinking about him after that meeting. He, however, spent that summer working. He was not thinking about her. He was producing several scripts during those summer months, and he'd take breaks occasionally to spend time with another important Fassbinder figure, Hanna Schygulla. Schygulla was in the acting classes with him, and they had this like really intense kind of connection and aesthetic understanding. Like Schygulla is like she never really quite fell for Fassbinder like many of the people around him did, but they've always had this kind of magnetic chemistry. Anyway, so they would spend time working together, just, you know, talking about art at this period. Yeah, so finally, after the summer ends, Fassbinder reconnects with Herman. He offers her a role in a short film, but there was no money in it. And he was so painfully embarrassed about this. She talks about him having trouble like meeting her gaze when he asked, but you know, she didn't care. She was in love. So she signed right up. So that's when the work finally starts happening. Fassbinder's gang shoot 2 shorts, A Little Chaos, and The City Tramp. Then 3 more things happen. Okay, so first, both films get rejected from the Oberhaus Festival. Fassbinder gets thrown out or quits, it's kind of unclear, acting school. And then 3, Herman fully devotes herself to Fassbinder, quitting her job and becoming his agent. So she pulls all of her money. I say agent, but like really, she pulls out all of her money, which isn't very much, from her bank account, and she gets these 2 heavy copies of the films they made and portfolio photographs, and she starts lugging them across Germany, visiting producers and TV stations, just trying to get somebody interested in him. So she finally finds someone interested. It like takes a while. She was running out of money. She's really excited. So she tries calling him and she can't get a hold of him. Then all of a sudden she finds out, oh, he's in jail. That's what's wrong. He to make money, him and Rosa, while she was like, you know, going around Germany, they were trying to make money for the next project. So they started driving cars, like I think it was like some sort of mafia thing. I might be wrong on that, but they were driving cars and like kind of moving illegal money or products for quick cash. And they spent a couple nights in a Turkish jail. So he missed his chance. He missed the audition, and he was so devastated when he found out. All 3 of them are out of money at this point. Oh God, I keep slipping through my slideshow. I'm so sorry, guys. Yeah, so they're, let's see here. Yeah, they're out of money at this point. And it seems like a dead-end career, career-wise. And Reiner just tries, you know, desperate for some sort of end to the film scene. He applies to the Berlin Film School and he gets rejected again. All right, so now slide 3. Fassbinder joins the action theater. So rejected and broke, you know, he returns back to Munich before he was in Berlin, and he reconnects with his actor friend Margit, who worked on A Little Chaos with him. She had joined this Brechtian theater troupe named Action Theater, which was modeled after Beck and Melina's Living Theater. They thought of themselves as activists first, seeing art as a site for radicalizing the public. Their plays were experimental, crafting rapport between performer and audience, and Fassbinder would later say that this facet, this rapport, was really what took his breath away. He knew in that moment it was his destiny to work with him. So Fassbinder starts showing up to all the practices with Margit. Like, he wasn't invited, but he was just there. I think you should be able to see right now a kind of a quote from Pierre Robin talking about how he's all pimply faced and they're all freaked out by him. I'm sorry?
Wait, I can still only see the first slide. It never moved slides for me.
I'm
still on Kluge.
Oh, weird. Here.
There we go. Amphitheater outside the frame.
Oh, so it wasn't moving. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. Okay, well, here are all the fabulous faces. We're there now. This other one wasn't that important anyway. So good to know. All right. Technology problems are what they are. So yeah, Fassbinder starts to practice with Margit, and he's kind of quietly forcing himself into the group. He was not accepted at first. See that Kurt Raub quote there? But he was persistent and he was patient. And eventually they would need an actor. And who else would they pick but him? So yeah, eventually somebody gets injured, they're out of work, and Fassbinder assumes their acting spot. And at this time, when Fassbinder's acting for them, the group starts bringing in tramps off the street, offering them hot meals if they involve themselves in the performances. This was to add another dimension to the Brechtian practices in their work. But one of those tramps stuck around, and they were all okay with it because he was super attractive. He claimed to be a prince that was down on his luck, and Margit decided she fancied him, and Fassbinder couldn't help but insert himself in their love game. So he started toying with both of them. Anyway, this all kind of comes to a breaking point when one day the prince, trying to get Margit's attention, stabs her 7 times, and she can't walk anymore, and she has to leave the theater, which means there's an opening for Hanna Schygulla. Everyone's thrilled. Well, really only Fassbinder's thrilled, but who cares? So with the addition of Schygulla, the troupe succeeds unlike ever before. She was a huge hit critically, and Fassbinder, who had that special bond with her, took over as head playwright and director, causing Kurt Raab to step down and slipping back into a supporting role. Fassbinder was exceptionally intuitive. Even Raab had to admit that. His role as director, in his role as director, he had this knack for connecting with the actors quickly, almost wordlessly, and getting exactly what he was looking for every time. Nobody could turn out productions as fast as he could. But Fassbinder's power grab did rub some people the wrong way, especially the original company leader, Horst, who felt that the action theater's politics should transcribe into direct political action. But Fassbinder and his followers, they didn't really see it that way. They're like, this is political action. The ideas and the artistic expression are this ample arena to connect with the populace, and like they will respond. That was not enough for Horst, but also, admittedly, there was another drama within there. Horst was making bombs beneath the stage for the RAF, this radical left-wing terrorist group. They were those RAF members were among the crowd every night at every performance, and Fassbinder was friends with them too. And they were known for like getting up and like shouting their politics when they thought the play was dragging. So, yeah, but with Horst, he was like really active with them. He was paint bombing places with them and protesting, so he was willing to make the bombs, whereas Fassbinder just wanted them there for making a scene. Anyway, the other thing though is that Fassbinder was sleeping with Horst's wife Ursula. This was a huge source of tension. She had joined a sadomasochistic threesome with him and Herman, which would often include Raab sometimes as well. But yeah, he was always cycling out of different lovers, writing plays about their relationships, choosing to cast the actors in those same parts, playing characters of himself. This happens throughout his work. It evolves in the way it plays out, but it happens throughout all of his work. Eventually, the action theater implodes. Yeah, Horst got arrested for burning down a commercial properties in Frankfurt. And so Fassbinder would take this opportunity to dissolve the group and start again with the anti-theater troupe, which was made up of a lot of the old players. So there we go. Now you're on the next slide, right? Okay, hopefully you guys are looking at the next slide. I think you should be. So yeah, the anti-theater troupe, he gets a second family now. Oh, good, all right. So yeah, so under Reiner's direction, the anti-theater group would see their per performance income increase tenfold, but everyone was growing dependent on him more and more, and this started to eat at him. He started to feel as if they were only around for his money and leeching off of him. At one point, I think he screams something like they're all vampires sucking his blood. And it comes up, I think, in one of the movies, like him saying, I think Beware the Holy Whore. Yeah, if you've seen that one, that is very much about how Fassbinder felt and how they all felt working together constantly. But anyway, that's a digression. During this same period, the first half of the anti-theater, Fassbinder's notoriety would rise dramatically. He was in 5 movies made by other young German directors, and he was producing loads of plays. This bounty and the variety of jobs continued into the next year, where he could finally pivot into filmmaking. Like finally, he could do what he wanted. So 1970, Fassbinder's anti-theater produces a whopping 11 films, all written by Fassbinder, directed by Fassbinder. That's to mention nothing of their theater output too. So it's insane. It's a movie a month, and then some. But by the end of the year, the authorities uncovered massive tax fraud for the troupe, for which Pierre Robin was responsible. So when Reiner got the bill, he fired him. But Robin thinks, however, that he was fired for actually sleeping with Fassbinder's then boyfriend, Gunther Kaufmann. For most of that year, Fassbinder and most of the troupe was crazy about this beautiful, mild-mannered Kaufmann. Before that, it was Harry Bear, also featured on the slide. And then Harry Bear was kind of at the center of his sexual and creative life. And then like when Kaufmann entered the fore, he just kicked him out and put Kaufmann at the center. So Kaufmann would assume all the best roles in the production, and most everyone would settle for bit parts. But everyone was obsessed with him. So some people were just fine with that. Like I know there's one bit in a biography I was reading where like, I think it was Rob was putting makeup on Kaufmann, and like Fassbinder got really mad because Rob was clearly like fondling Kaufmann's body. He's like, stop handling him, And so it was just, it was crazy. Anyway, Fassbinder would shower Kaufman with gifts, usually cars, which Kaufman would crash or sell on almost a monthly basis, all paid for by the collective's profits. This was a big source of tension as well. Like a lot of this money would just go to Kaufman to keep him happy, because Kaufman had a wife and kids at home, and he would leave Fassbinder sometimes. And when he would leave Fassbinder, kind of like to like abuse him and gaslight him, he would like Fassbinder would like flip out, threaten killing himself on set. He would just completely shut down. It was bad. So, you know, this money would just be siphoned to just kind of chill out Kaufman and then make production run more smoothly. Okay, so now we're going to jump again to 1971. Okay, let's move to the next slide. All right, so in 71, there's a lot that happens for Fassbinder in the way of slowing down. It's very rare for him to take a break, but so all that stuff with Kaufman kind of explodes in a very strange fashion. So Fassbinder ends up marrying Ingrid Cavan, just to kind of get at him, just to prove that he could have a wife and kids if he wanted. And Cavan, there's a lot of reasons why she might have wanted to marry him. She was in the troupe, but she's kind of like looking to move up the social ladder, and there's a lot of benefits to being Mrs. Fassbinder. Plus, you know, they did have like a sexual chemistry as well, or at least that's what both of them say. There's something there, but it was weird. Like on their wedding night, Kevin was drunk and Fassbinder left with Kaufman and locked the door while she was like crying drunk. It was, you know, they were all, by the end of this is what I'm trying to say, is they were burnt out, they were out of money, they were out of emotional energy. So Kevin and Fassbinder just took off for an apartment in Munich and just buckled down. So after dissolving amphitheater, Fassbinder needed to find a new way in to like film again. So this was a time for research and reflection. He went to a lot of different Munich museums, looking at works by Poussin and by puppets by Belmar, which you both see on these slides here. They provide a lot of thematic dimension and inform the sets for Petra von Kant. I'm sure you can see why now. So anyway, if not, we can talk about it. But he also attends a Berlin retrospective of Douglas Sirk's melodramas, all of which were new to Fassbinder. Josh talked about this last week, but just to quickly touch on that, the discovery of melodrama and Sirk changed everything for Fassbinder. Finally, he had found this Hollywood mode that would take his politics, you know, and make them accessible for the public. Yeah, so he just wanted to find this way to take his art cinema practice and make it something that moved beyond his, for lack of a better term, sex cult. Yeah, so during this period as well, while he was kind of exposing himself to works of art and going to the museum, he worked on 3 plays, one of which was Petra von Kant. It had like a run as a theater production. And all of these works were unified by attacking bourgeois society, which he saw as a system of oppression, and in a unique way for women, of course, but also class for him is the bedrock of all issues. Yeah, so in this work, you know, or in these works, he would question the new liberation as well, the gay liberation and the women's movement, thinking that their kind of ideas of utopia were naive. And he criticizes this, also while pointing, I think, to him as well as being a hypocrite. It's pretty clear from his biography to see how he is a victim of and a whistleblower of these things. Yeah, so another way we can think about Petra, though, this product that comes out with it, is an exorcism of the amphitheater's past, like a final nail in the coffin. It was like a release of Fassbinder's love life at the time. All right, so moving on. All right, so this slide is an abridged casting crew. It's not that much abridged, it's a very small casting crew for this film. I just wanted to pull for you the names that are relevant to Fassbinder. Though the second half of this bottom cast list here aren't super relevant. That's not true. Katrin's in a lot of stuff. But the last 2, Gabrielle von Kant and Valerie von Kant, they don't really, I don't think, appear in that many films after that. So let's see. What was I going to tell you guys about this? There's so many inroads into Petra von Kant, and I really want to kind of collaborate with you guys on what you saw and what you interpreted. But let me just quickly get into some of the press around the release of the film. So in his biography of Fassbinder, Kurt Raab presents the story of Petra von Kant as one that could be performed by 6 men. It was actually a man's piece. It was about a part of his love life, his history with Kaufman. So at this point, it's commonplace for film scholars and critics to interpret the work as one with larger than life portrayals of femininity, which can be understood as like a role play of womanhood. And by this point, I mean contemporary scholars. And I even think like contemporary scholars and Rob are both like kind of missing something important here. And Rosa von Pronheim kind of points to this, the filmmaker also of the new German cinema movement. He compared Fassbinder's women to Tennessee Williams's. Like his women figures were always a part of his, they say transvestic, but really this is the 70s. What they mean is like androgynous, amorphous soul that like Fassbinder is like, I mean, I guess like even like non-binary. Well, we won't get into that, but yeah, it's an androgynous thing. Like the women are part of him as the men are. But then there's this opening credit too that kind of contradicts the whole Gunther Kaufmann thing, right? It dedicates itself to Marlene, which is a unusual credit, or adds an unusual credit with the special participation of Herman as Marlene. Yeah, so we'll unpack that in a second here, but this opening credit kind of tempts you to read it as biography, right? Yeah, but surrounding the film's initial release, Fassbinder supported a more Kaufman-focused reading, framing Petra as being on a particular relationship of mine, quote, where the man he was seeing was, and he said this about Kaufman before, quote, like a father, like a child, like a man, like a woman. Occasionally, he'd reference his triangular relationship with Kaufman and Pierre Robin, saying that Robin's position was what inspired Marlene. But again, like, it seems really likely. I think I glossed over this, but when Herman would repeatedly be in situations, and this was like all over the German tabloids, like that she would be having Fassbinder live with her, and it would be like Ursula or Robin or Gunther Kaufmann, any of them. They would sleep in the bed with Fassbinder in Herman's apartment, and Herman would sleep on the floor. Like there was a lot of gossiping about this kind of like, you know, trio relationship kind of thing he would do. Yeah, so again, kind of giving fixed definitions of these are like a little dubious, a little provocative. I don't think he's being totally serious here. And the answer would change yet again years down the lines as Fassbinder stretched the biographical plane further by suggesting that the source was not as clear cut. Quote, it begun with an attempt to explore his relationship with Gunther Kaufmann. It had gradually absorbed elements of his relationships with Herman, whose character, Marlene, reflects Herman's real life role as a masochistic voyeur to many of Fassbinder's male love affairs. And all of these differing explanations of Fassbinder, there's one constant, though, that we can infer, okay? The relationship dynamics in Petra von Kant move across heterosexual and homosexual relationships, as well as male and female experiences. This dynamic takes the form of unacknowledged displays of dominance and submission that Fassbinder implies are intrinsic to all intimate relationships in and outside of the film. That is to say, for Fassbinder, sadomasochism, or, you know, class structure, you could substitute that for class structure, becomes this all-pervasive psychic force within society, while an individual's identification with that spectrum is perpetually in flux. These understandings are radically ahead of their time, whether or not you agree with them. This predates Judith Butler and Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick's groundbreaking queer theories of the 90s, the ones about identity and sexuality being on a spectrum. Yeah, as well as predicting that we might consider to be like queer aesthetics. Like it's queer in its framing. We can get into all this later. Before the new queer cinema did that in the 90s. So another site of interest for me personally is the way that Fassbinder uses reality. Now I'm gonna throw something kind of academic at you. And again, we can unpack this in discussion, but Fassbinder uses reality as a site of excess in the melodrama. Now, I can't really go over all of melodrama theory here. We don't have time, but he creates this force. I want to call it like an abiographical force, which makes the real, or his personal biography, well known by German tabloids again, as a site of excess. He was only able to achieve such a radical expression once he realized how to co-opt melodrama for his art cinema mode. This is crazy. I wish I had the time to give you this crash course in theory, but I don't. basically, like the takeaway here is that I'm trying to attribute, or when I read or write about this film, as I have, it's about attributing the melodramatic mode for the radical expressions of identity. People often want to attribute that to art cinema, and I think this kind of obsession with like art cinema, and again, this is getting really academic, but like the obsessive discourse academics have over art cinema being this like objective mode. It's patriarchal, you know, it comes down to the French New Wave, which I love, but it's also quite patriarchal. It's kind of using this like so-called feminine force of melodrama, of hysteria, to turn away from conventional language and kind of somehow have forces of identity or whatever move across these planes. I feel like I hope it's understandable. We can, again, it's easier to kind of get through these things in a conversation. I can see where you're at. But yeah, so there's so much to discuss with Fassbinder. Just know that he proves in this movie that melodrama is more punk than the French New Wave or any so-called Hollywood version of melodrama. But yeah, I'm gonna flip it over to discussion now because we have so much to talk about. There's the puppets, there's the pousse on wallpaper, like whatever you guys want to talk about, let's go for it.
Well, thanks, Cait. We've got one question submitted already, and everybody else. Oh, Cait, if you can unshare your screen, that would be helpful.
I will unshare the screen. I would love to do that.
You know, we have one question already, and yeah, everybody else, please feel free to pipe up with your questions. Like I said, you can. It's preferable to type them into the Q&A. You can also raise your hand to speak your questions. If you put them in the chat, I'm likely to miss them, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend the chat. But no, an anonymous attendee wants to know, given that you know something about Fassbinder, or maybe the anonymous attendee knows something about Fassbinder, I can't tell. I'm wondering if you think there's some fun or not so fun insert stuff going on with the character of Petra.
What do you mean by like some fun or not so fun stuff with the insertion of Petra? Could you repeat that? I'm sorry, I think I missed what you were saying.
I'm wondering if you think there's some fun / not so fun self-insert stuff going on with the character of Petra.
Stuff.
Yeah.
I miss self. Okay, I was like, yeah. So, okay, one thing I'm tempted to go into, and this isn't what you asked me, but like, if anyone, I'm not going to unpack this too much, but if anyone knows anything about Kant, like the philosopher Kant and Petra von Kant, so this kind of plurality of identities and his personal histories I was talking about is so against Kant. So like, I kind of feel like he named it Petra von Kant as like a wink, like we're like not Kant, like Kant can cry over this. But as for self-insert, I think it's across all of it. Like at any point, Fassbinder shifts from being, you know, Marlene, take Marlene for instance, like she starts the film by like pulling open the blinds, the light hits, like it's like the director, you know, saying action, like everybody rise, you know, and the play starts there. So sometimes I think he's very much being her. Then other times it's pretty clear that like the relationship with Petra and Karin is very much a stand-in for Gunther Kaufmann and his relationship, especially coming down to like how Petra's like buying all of these things for her and she's just taking advantage of her. Yeah, and all the work revolves around her. Like Marlena is there working for her because she's a fashion. If she wasn't a fashion designer, she might not have Marlena there. Like I think it's very much a commentary on how Fassbinder would create these films to maintain connections to people. He'd use work as a way. Like he couldn't step into those bars as I was talking about at first because he had no work to show. He needs to have constant projects. So then everyone has to hang around for the next project. You know, it's like a cycle. But yeah.
So one of the things that tends to be the most talked about with regards to this film is that it has an all-female cast. There are literally no men in this movie at all. I'd like to talk a little bit about gender roles and things like that, but maybe an interesting place to start, or maybe hopefully interesting place to start is, do you think it undercuts the film that it was written and directed by a man? And then also another thing that tends to get talked about a lot is the cinematography, which is Michael Ballhaus, who is also a man. So does that like work against it, do you think? Or like,
does the cinematography work against it?
No,
the two men. Okay,
right,
gotcha.
yeah, like the people that are seen as the artists behind the film are men, but it's this very celebrated movie. I mean, like how many movies can you think of that don't pass the reverse Bechdel test? Like this is one of like half a dozen, it seems like. So like, does it undercut it that men made it, do you think?
No, I think it enhances it. Like as I was saying about the queer aesthetics portion of that talk, like I think it being, okay, so first off, I'm also going to use that to just talk about the women's liberation reception to this film when it came out. People were, there's a one of my favorite women's lit mags reads from the 70s. Oftentimes I'm a fan of like the stuff I'm reading in there. It's called Red Rag, which is a hilarious name. And in Red Rag, the critics hated this movie because they thought it was like, you know, you just have these two women having cat fights, and like at the time the liberation movement really wanted like big shiny Cary Grant characters like to like hang their like liberation talk on, you know. They wanted to like, oppression's real, but then they made it, you know, it gets better. But Fassbinder's whole thing is that like man or woman, like society, like there's no chance for reform, you know, reform is impossible, like you're always going to suffer. The only thing you can do is to be aware. And that's why I think Marlena, there's an argument to be made that she is the most aware of what's happening in that whole group, and that's why she kind of she can exit on her own terms, and she kind of has this, like, in some ways she's the most powerful character, I think. That's, again, there's so much to debate with this film, but that's how I read it. But again, the Bauhaus filmmaking, and I think Fassbinder being men only enriches it and kind of pushes forward this kind of post, you know, gay, lesbian, binary into like a queer dialogue of identity. Yeah, and Bauhaus's camera work is really cool because the film is so static, right? You've got these like really controlled like insular sets, and his camera's like this wandering eye across all of it. And I think it kind of helps too that Bauhaus wasn't really, he was doing a lot of shooting for Fassbinder, but he was never quite in the like, you know, the sex cult part of it. He's just around it. And so I think it kind of enhances that he's this outsider eye on all of this, as we are. We're never too outside, right? We're always being indicted by him to participate in this and to reflect in our reactions to, say, Petra, who goes from being cruel to deeply sympathetic to cruel again. Yeah.
Okay, so to continue on the topic of like gender roles, you touched on this on like in the main part of your presentation, but I wanted to come back to it. The notion that it started off like it's 6 men, but for us it's kind of a fixed thing that's 6 women. How fluid is that these days? And I'll preface, just so that doesn't feel like a trick question, the Fassbinder collaborator Volker Spengler, who's the lead of In a Year with 13 Moons, among other things, after Fassbinder died, staged this play with an all-male cast. So do you think, like, is it fixed in time, is all female now, or is there still fluidity where you can go back and forth? What would happen if you changed, like, is it like a 12 Angry Men thing, or can you do like a His Girl Friday switcheroo where one character changes genders? Like, how do you feel the fluidity of genders now?
Again, like if you were to put this on now, or like put a production on this now, as like, first of all, the all-male casting I think is quite beautiful because it brings the attention to Fassbinder, you know, by doing that. Like that's like a memorial move, you know, and that's very sweet. But yeah, I think you can do those things. I mean, you have elements of those things playing out. I mean, well, first off, I think there's less literal, you know, reinterpretations of Petra von Kant that very much engage with these themes, such as like The Clouds of Sils Maria, or what's another recent one? There's another recent one. But if you've seen like other Fassbinder productions, like Water Drops and Burning Rocks, for example, a lot of similar themes happening here. Again, this moves across. Like one thing I really, really don't like about a lot of Fassbinder biographies is they tend to either paint his female lovers as being stupid, thinking that they can trick them into being heterosexual, or you get like the Julian Lorenz, like later Fassbinder stuff where like he was straight all along. Like a lot of people want to take a stab at his sexuality and like claim it, academic or just, you know, popular critics. But I think that kind of limits and fully misses the point. So if you were to make it a male cast, I think it would go for it. It shouldn't change anything. That would be against the work to really change it, I think. Yeah.
Okay. I've got plenty more questions myself, but we're starting to get some from the audience. So thank you, audience. We'll go to that. So Josh Ray wants to know, well, I guess he wants you to talk about the mannequins. So please talk about the mannequins.
Okay, so the mannequins are interesting. I think really just talking about the portraits. And okay, so like you have this field, right, where it's the wallpaper, the Poussin wallpaper, which is zoomed in and cropped. It is that image. I wish I could just pull up that image easily. I'm not gonna get out of this video and try to do that for you, but it's zoomed in and cropped, and it's done in such a way that you have the male sex like framed at the center, and then two people gesturing across this male body. And then you have like echoes of that. Like you have Karin and Petra often, sometimes Sydney, sometimes other people, mirroring those poses or other poses within that. And then on the furthest field of vision, you would then have puppets. And the puppets are really kind of, or mannequins. And the puppets and mannequins, the dolls, are like kind of a complicated situation here. Like there's a Belmar photo I put in that flash drive. Belmar was like a Weimar era, someone who ended up being really anti-Nazi and like fleeing Germany, I think. Like mainly a puppeteer, but he did a lot of stuff. And he was really fascinated by fetishism and the fabrics of the puppets, and interested in talking about like how puppets are molded. There's just a lot of themes that were kind of like undercurrents within the Fassbinder film, right? But this was happening like in the 30s. So Fassbinder saw these pieces when he was in his break, when he was going to this one Munich museum often. And I think so that's where he first got sorry, that's where he first got the idea to bring those puppets in. And I think one thing that is particularly powerful to me about the puppets is that although they are kind of just talking about how these people are dolled up and manipulated and feelings are being manipulated, because, Karin is often like, or Petra's often bleached out to look like the puppets, to look like she's almost dead, she's suspended in motion. There's a sense of there being no choice, or just products to be manipulated, people to be manipulated by like other forces. So that's one element to it. And then the second is that I think it calls attention to the fact that Fassbinder is the one manipulating him. Like, I think Fassbinder is saying like, these are my dolls. Like, this is my, like, and not like I'm all powerful, which maybe on one hand, yes. On the other hand, like I am manipulating them. Like, you need to think about that. So especially as if we look at Marlene, I'm seeing Jessica Pierce's question. If we look at Marlene as, if we want to read her as Fassbinder, which I don't think she's any one thing at any one time, she's also, she's dressing the dolls and she's positioning them. And they almost seem to be mocking or laughing sometimes at Petra and at Karin, or sympathizing with. It goes every which way. It sounds like I'm saying nothing because I'm keep contradicting what I'm saying, but that's like Fassbinder and that's his work. It's everything is two sides of the same coin.
I feel like there are a lot of threads to be pulled with regards to what does this thing mean? What does that mean? Who does this person represent? But in addition to the mannequins, and you talked about like the painting that's always kind of oppressively hovering over them.
Yeah.
Ballhaus likes to foreground the carpet, like that shag carpet.
And then, I love the shag carpet.
Yeah, and then Marlene has the gun in the end. Like you never see a gun until like the last scene, but then Marlene takes a gun with her. There's a lot of odd details like that. Do you have strong feelings about the shag carpet or the gun, or who represents whom or anything?
Related to the shag carpet, well, the shag carpet and the gun, like both of those things just make me think of the campiness of it all, but the kind of cropped in like wallpaper without the frame, and then the carpet kind of extends into it. It's kind of like, I feel like because that carpet is so theatrical, and then you have that no frame wallpaper, mass produced Poussin, right, or Poussin. It's like some people will say, I think it's Bazin that said like the frame existed. Like frames exist on a painting to separate it from the wall, to like put the end of, this is the end of the fiction and now here you're in reality. Like by getting rid of that frame, it's like, it's all fiction. And another thing too, just while we're talking about objects, like I think the history of it all too, the fact that you have these like outrageous outfits that are like kind of great. Like the costumes are kind of awesome, but also like hysterical. Like this kind of like bondage, like Roman, garb that Karin's wearing. Like, is it hideous or is it great? I don't know. It's like the best fashion though, really. Yeah, what was I gonna say about that though? There's something, I lost it. What was that? Oh, right. She puts on a lot of different wigs, Petra does, and those two, I think it's like kind of like blurring the timelines. Her wigs move across eras, like it's like personal history, history itself is all to be played with. Anyway, what were you gonna say, Pete? I feel like you.
Oh no, I was just going to move to a new question is all.
Let's go to a new question. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a couple more from the audience. Another anonymous attendee says that you talked about how Petra is not Kant. How so? Can you elaborate? That sounds awesome.
Oh, not Kant. Okay.
Not Kant.
Well, Petra von Kant. So, okay, this is really kind of dense theory. I hope I can make it really simple. And I'm gonna try to do it really quickly. So Kant, the philosopher Kant, it's a real obsession for him with signifier and like the object and what it signifies. Okay, so like the whole, like it's like gets into linguistics. So a lot of our language structure, a lot of languages are just structured to talk about things in terms of what they are and what they aren't. Like there's straight and there's gay, you know, there's these like binaries that come up. And so with Kant, he was talking a lot about how this would work within language of there being a thing, and then you have to have not a thing for the thing to be the thing, if that makes any kind of sense. And so for Fassbinder, by calling her Petra von Kant, and if we're talking about this film and looking at it in the terms of like a amorphous identity, amorphous sexualities, amorphous roles and power, like everything is shifting constantly, which, side note, I kind of feel like the natural conclusion to a lot of the theory in this film is happening in Kaufman, not Gunther, Charlie Kaufman's newest feature. Like when I saw it, I was just like, this is Petra von Kant. Because what is it? I'm thinking of ending things. I'm not going to spoil it, of course, but if you are interested in the more philosophy elements of what's happening here, you should definitely watch that film, because it kind of rejects Kant in a different way, but the same way. And anyway, going back to the whole not Kant thing. Really, I feel like I'm a fortune cookie or something. Like, anyway, so the Kant situation, it's like Fassbinder's like, no, it's not object and then other. It's not man and then woman. It's everything. Like, there's just like you are with. You are not, like, you're being with instead of being against something. And that's like a radical statement all the way down to linguistics. But yeah. Anyway, I hope that answered your not Kant question.
Well, perhaps the same anonymous attendee, either that or everybody wants to be anonymous tonight. They have another question. So Marlena, can we talk about the last scene? Did she leave Petra because Petra had an emotional epiphany and may not treat her oppressively in the future? In other words, did Marlena really love the abuse that Petra inflicted on her?
That's a great question. And I think it's kind of in a way up to you to interpret. But I think, and Fassbinder once even said, but again, I quoted Fassbinder saying many different things about how to interpret and who's who. But Fassbinder made a reference to this question, saying that it would be, she left because she was no longer going to get the abuse she wanted, you know, like, and she's a masochist and she went to go get abused elsewhere. She was sick of Petra. So you could perhaps read it that way. That she came to her senses too. Maybe she came to her senses and she left and she had a healthy relationship. I don't think that happens. I don't think there are healthy relationships in Fassbinder cinema, like on the screen or off. But yeah, I think if you want to, not to be like dissatisfying, but if you want to read it that way, and I tend to, is that she left because she wanted someone that could satisfy her.
Well, I guess on that note, one of the questions I had written down, like just for myself, is do you think this film has a happy ending? And specifically, I feel like the notion of a happy ending is relative in Fassbinder. Like in Fassbinder's oeuvre, this definitely has a happy ending because nobody dies. Like it's got like the happiest ending. But I mean, more in perhaps traditional terms, do you think we're to read this ending as happy, especially if you pivot to like, what if Marlena were the main character the whole time and like it was just a misdirect to focus on Petra? Like, who does it have a happy ending for? Anybody, I guess I'm asking.
I think, okay, so again, to go back to the critical reception, so people that, like, I think Vincent Canby just said it was just left-wing melancholy and he hated it. Vincent Canby is like the greatest heel. I just love reading him and getting angry. But anyway, yeah, he was not a fan. And a lot of critics felt this way too. People that wanted to champion him, they thought his cinema was just too cynical, you know. And to me, it's I would say kind of a happy ending. Like, and I think like you saying no one died, he would often get criticized for like everyone dies at the end always. and he would say, life is difficult, so art is difficult, so life doesn't have to be, you know, like, fuck you. But yeah, to me, the ending is I don't know if I'd say the ending is per se happy. It's kind of open-ended, but there's, I think, one of the most tender moments in any Fassbinder film, Ali included in this film, and when Petra is talking to her mother and they have this kind of heart to heart, and it feels like almost like real communication, which is rarely possible even in the sweetest of relationships, like, you know, in the one in Ali Fear Eats the Soul, like true communication is almost impossible. So to me, that conversation is moving between Petra and her mother. I think it's a neutral, you know what, I think I have to say it's a neutral ending, because I think the cycle just continues, but it's happy for Marlena because she got out of there, and got what she wanted elsewhere. Like, there's no doubt in my mind when she like walks out with like all of that like sureness, you know, that confidence, that like whatever it is, she's doing what she wants.
I guess we'll pivot a little bit. One thing, I haven't seen this addressed much in what I've read about the film. Do you want to talk about its connection to All About Eve? And the reason I ask is because I think it's the opening scene. It's one of the first scenes. Petra implies on the phone that she owes a debt to Joseph Mankiewicz, who of course is the All About Eve director, writer-director. And then also, like, it does bear at least some passing similarities in terms of plot. Do you want to explore that a little bit?
You know, I actually did watch All About Eve to just kind of refresh myself before watching Petra. Again, you know, for like the 20th time. And I kind of feel like beyond those references and beyond, like, I think Fassbinder's just obsession with old Hollywood at this point. This was coming out, you know, when he discovered Cirque, and then he started looking at Hollywood in a different way. I kind of feel like, for me personally, unless you have something to dig out there, I kind of think it begins and ends in just that kind of like tonal similarity. You know, I don't think there's much more connective tissue beyond just the kind of vibe and the name drop. Yeah, unless, I don't know if you felt that way or not, but yeah.
No, not really. I just wondered if, yeah.
I will say too, he did write this in, I think he wrote the play in 10 hours on a flight. So 10 hours on a flight and shot it in like 10 days. And not that he can't reference something in 10 hours on a flight. There's loads of references in this film. But I think it has a lot more to do with Bergman's persona than it does, you know, All About Eve. Yeah.
That's another one of the 6 films that doesn't pass the reverse Bechdel test. Persona. We've gotten 2 of the 6. That's 6. That's an arbitrary number if that's unclear. I guess maybe the last question, unless someone in the audience just has a burning question that they pipe up with in the next minute or two. Again, you talked about this briefly in the main presentation, but I wanted to go back to it. Why is this film dedicated to Herman? Do you have a read, like, why is she the key player that gets the dedication on this one?
You know, it's hard to, I can't speak for Fassbinder, obviously, as much as I try to, as much as I spend time reading books trying to sound exactly like him. I feel like, for me personally, part of it I think is like a wink or tongue in cheek. This came out though after The Merchant of Four Seasons. I think, yes, it did, and because I think that's how he got connected to some of the people actually in this production. Merchant of Four Seasons was like a huge hit. It was his first like melodrama mode in this wave of films, and it's fantastic. But and that was a really rough film for Herman. You know, like she'll speak a lot on like this like breakdown she had on set where he humiliated her openly to get a reaction he wanted for the film. And so in some ways, I think it was like this is for you, like after going through that. But also, like, I mean, whatever he put her through in Merchant of Four Seasons, like she's his oldest collaborator and biggest believer, you know, and no one was more intimately involved like this than I think she was. Like, I would say even more so than his male lovers. In some ways, I think it's like about the core of their relationship and their understanding and his kind of assessment of all that. Like, no one feels these things deeper than Herman, I think. But I don't know. It's hard to really speak for Fassbinder there.
Well, thank you. I guess that's as good a place as any to end. We'll give ourselves our own Fassbinder-esque happy ending, or maybe it's happy and maybe it's not. I don't know. But anyway, please, everyone that came, thank you for coming, and I invite you to come back next week. I'll publicly embarrass myself talking about In a Year with 13 Moons, and then 2 weeks from today, we're doing The Third Generation. Thanks for very forcefully agreeing with me saying I was going to embarrass myself, Cait. But
yes, you will.
yeah. So come back next week for me, 13 Moons, and 2 weeks from now for Robert Hunt and The Third Generation. And thanks again. Hope to see you soon.